Thanks for being here. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss new stories. How would you react if you saw your wife dressed like a catwalk and asked where she was going? And she'd wait? You often say she didn't want you to go there. Our story today with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. It was hard work. On Friday, one of the machines at the factory broke down. I spent most of the day working with a team of engineers, diagnosing a series of hardware and software issues that left the entire team exhausted. My business for the past 10 years has been a printing company that I founded in the northern part of Sydney, Australia. On this Friday evening, I pulled into the garage and parked, leaning back in my seat for a minute. I was tired and just wanted the day to end. Owning a printing company that produces commercial and one-off printed products has always been exhausting. On the home front, I was disappointed because my wife, Louise, with whom I had lived for over 15 years, had not been very kind to me lately. I'm a sensitive guy. It is a woman's attention and care that energizes me. However, recently, Louise has become withdrawn and moody. She loves quality time and appreciates when I give her my attention. I try to do this regularly, but it's difficult when your wife pushes you away and you also have to run a company. Let me introduce myself. I'm Cameron, 42 years old. Louise and I have 2 daughters. Our eldest, Carrie, is an 18-year-old physical version of her mother when she was younger. She is smart, stubborn, and knows what she wants. She's in her 3rd year at university, studying engineering and wants to work with me on designing new printing presses when she graduates. I'm sure you're thinking how she's 18 and already in her 3rd year of university. Well, she's incredibly smart. You might also notice that I mentioned Louise and I have been married for only 15 years, which is thanks to our 2nd daughter, Sarah. We were happy with our marriage, but got married when we found out we were pregnant with Sarah. Sarah is our hippie baby for lack of a better term. She goes with the flow, doesn't have strong opinions on many issues, and usually takes the path of least resistance. She is as smart as her sister, but prefers not to use her mind too much. At 15, she's a social butterfly, spending most of her time with friends or glued to her phone, chatting on Discord. Both of our girls were away for the weekend. Sarah was visiting friends and Carrie was out with her boyfriend Robbie. I expected them both to return home on Sunday afternoon, leaving Louise and me at home alone. I sat thinking about the past week and slowly began to put work out of my mind. Once the girls were gone, perhaps Louise and I could work through some of our recent problems with a couple of drinks and some honesty. I climbed out of my truck. A 2-year-old Ford Ranger grabbed my bag and walked into the kitchen. Louise wasn't around, so I poured myself a Coke and canned my favorite drink and turned on some nice tunes. As I sat, I stared at the paint on the walls, trying to forget about the day. The broken machine was sort of restored and running, but it cost us at least $10,000 in lost income, and there would be more if we didn't get proper repairs next week. This was a significant portion of the wages for my employees in the Sydney market. I heard movement in the click of heels, which pulled me from my internal dialogue. My wife, Louise, walked into the room and my breath caught. Louise is about 3 months older than me, and has always been an incredible woman in my eyes. After having 2 children and being in her 40s, she had put on a little weight, but she went to the gym regularly and ate right most of the time, so she kept her curves in the right places. Louise was my everything. She was dressed up and ready to go out. Her hair was combed back and her makeup was applied. Her purse looked almost bloated as she placed it on the table looking at me. She said, "You look good, my love," and smiled. I sighed, taking a sip of my drink. "Sorry, Lou. It's been a hard day and I just don't have the energy to go to dinner today," I said apologetically, looking her up and down. She smiled at me again, but this time there was no warmth in her eyes. Something inside me shifted, and my day went from unpleasant to downright shitty. "It's okay, Kim," she said in a slightly shaky tone. "I didn't plan for you to come with me." I looked at her. In all our years together, we had rarely gone out anywhere apart. Even when she occasionally spent an evening with her girlfriends, she never dressed as if it was a date. She didn't plan. You didn't plan? I asked questioningly. I took a long sip of my drink. Then why are you dressed like we're going on a fancy date? For a moment, Louise looked unsure of herself. Cameron, she said, looking at herself and stopping. Are you leaving me? Louise was taken aback. No, of course not, Kim. She tried to extend her hand, but I pulled away and laughed bitterly. Now you're going to tell me that this has nothing to do with us? That this is something you had to do for yourself? You're going to tell me that you deserve this, after raising 2 children and dedicating yourself to our family? I raised an eyebrow, looking at my quickly losing, arrogant wife. I glanced at her impressive, bulky handbag on the table. Judging by your bag, you were planning on coming home tonight. So it's great to see you after all these years, so casually giving up on her marriage, without thinking about what it would do to us. I threw these words at her, my voice taking on an accusatory, argumentative tone. Kim? She stopped and looked at me. This time I didn't interrupt her. She sighed and spoke quietly. We both work so hard, and I know what you do for us, but I will only be dating Roger for a while. Roger. As in Roger Forth, the guy from your job? I asked, incredulous. Roger Forth is married and has 3 children under 10. The fact that her lover was Roger Forth took me by surprise. Yes, Kim. Roger. She sighed again. He's been so good to me these last few months since you weren't here. I exploded. What? I shouted, surprised by my own outburst of anger. You heard me, Louise. You rationalize your way into having an affair. Of course we work hard. But to say that I wasn't here is complete nonsense, and you know it. You're the one pulling away from me. I've been trying to be with you for months now, but you treat me coldly. At least now I know why. Are you kidding me? I suddenly stood up, my chair scraping on the floor. Cameron, I'm not making fun of you, she muttered. Tonight. I mean, this weekend was supposed to be our first time, she said shyly. Okay, so you're becoming an even bigger cheater, not just for one night, but for the whole weekend. I glared at her. Cheating on me? I stared at her for a moment, then turned and headed to the kitchen for another drink. I was very tired after work, but I needed another friend. I was pouring a double portion when Louise came and stood in the kitchen doorway. She was angry and, for the first time, she was not ashamed of her feelings. Cameron, I am not a cheater and never have been. But unlike you and your first love, Rose, I have never been with another man in my entire life. Roger tells me I'm not cheating on you because I'm telling you it's happening. It would be a lie if I hid it. It's low, Lou, to drag Rose into this. It's a low blow, and you know it. I almost growled in her. At least she had the decency to look away. And you are deeply mistaken, dear wife. It is treason if I do not accept this, and I do not accept the fact that you dragged another man into bed. I assume your new man is having the same conversation with his wife. She muttered, I don't know. She was now looking down at her shoes. I snorted as I topped up the double crown with some Coke, then turned to look at Louise. Her face was a mask of emotion. Most likely he is lying to her with all his might. Then he must be away and will be unavailable. I changed my tactics. Has he already kissed you? What? Louise asked. It's a simple question. Has Roger Forth kissed you? I saw her nod. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? I tried to control my anger. My wife had stopped paying attention to me, rejected my attempts to be close to her, while she was communicating more and more with another man. So I guess that's it. We're done, I said, walking out onto the back porch and slamming the back door so hard the house shook. I sat down on a chair, a table on the back porch, fuming. It was a rough day at work. I wanted to come home to be with my wife, and now she was telling me she was betraying me. It must have been about 5 minutes before Louise appeared at the door. She tried a softer approach. Kim, I really love you, but I need to do this. I've just felt so stuck over the last year. Roger was so understanding. It won't last long, you'll see. I continued to look out into the yard without looking at her. Now, Louise, you don't understand. It would be better if you contacted me. I was supposed to be your best friend, your partner, but you gave yourself to another man and deprived me of the opportunity to be with you. So now I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. She didn't move. Cameron, she said quietly and firmly, but with a hint of trepidation, you can't leave. Roger tells me that if you do this, I will take everything from you. I can take half of your business, get the house, the children, and then it will be easy to turn them against you. Her voice became stronger as she stepped forward, placing her hand on my shoulder. I turned and looked at her, disgusted at the sight of her. I withdrew my shoulder from her touch. Would you do this to someone you just confessed your love to? You cheated on me, threatened me, and then you believe you can get away with it. I wouldn't want that, my wife told me. But Roger said that in court I will always come out on top. You don't have much choice. I'm sure I'll get this out of my mind and get back to you. You'll be fine. You're stronger than me. For the second time that evening, I suddenly stood up, but this time I turned around, looking with hatred at the woman whom at that moment I still loved. For some reason. Yet the hatred and anger I felt did not give me peace. You are a selfish, unfaithful cheater, I hissed. She took a step back. You dare to confess your love to me, thinking that after this moment I will have any intention of remaining married to you. So you're telling me I have no choice? Well, screw you, Louise. You've shown me that I have no idea who the hell you are. You are not the woman I married. It's as if something alien has taken over you. The woman I loved would never have said she would destroy me by using my children against me. So who the hell are you? Kim, she trailed off. I let my anger pass as suddenly as it had come, taking a rational route for a moment to see if I could talk some sense into her. Lou, please. If you love me as much as you say, then stop this right now. I don't know if we can save for marriage after what you just told me. You were intimate with another man. Even if you didn't sleep with him, if you call it off now and we go to counseling, I promise I will try to understand what you've been through. I will try to forgive you for your betrayal. My betrayal, she whispered. I nodded. Yes, Louise. Betrayal? You may not see it right now, but our marriage is in a deadly situation because of what you just stated. So cancel that and let's do an emergency consultation. I'll call Rose now, and we can get her here tonight to help us. Louise had thrown words at me about Rose a little earlier. She was right that Rose was my first love, but it wasn't meant to be, as we ended up in different places, falling in love with different people. However, Rose and her husband, Toby, were very close friends of ours. I never thought Louise would use Rose in my story against me in an argument until tonight. Rose was also a therapist, and Toby became one of my closest friends over the years. We complemented each other, of course. It helped that we looked at the world with the same views on everything, from religion and politics to proximity, infidelity. It also helped that our children grew up together. Robbie, Rose, and Toby's son, and Carrie were as inseparable as a gang of thieves. From birth, they had been dating as a couple since 5th grade. I knew that in a few years their relationship would continue to develop, given the right nurturing environment. Now, Kim, I don't want Rose to be the center of this, she said, defiantly. She sighed. Listen, Kim, I understand how angry you are. You may think I don't understand, but I do. I want to correct her, but she raised her hand. Let me finish. You think I don't love you, but that's not true. You're right that these threats were wrong. I shouldn't have made them. However, this does not make them any less true. I looked at the woman standing in front of me, wondering if the alien spawn that had infected her brain was multiplying. I'll make a deal with you. I know I hurt you, but, Cameron, I'm going with Roger this weekend. I'll see a psychologist when Roger and I are done. It may take a while, but if you feel counseling is so important to us, then we'll go when Roger and I get tired of each other. What about the girls? I asked. What about them? Louise asked. How are we going to tell them that we are breaking up? I said in a calm voice. Cameron, we're not. She suddenly stopped. Sign. We are not parting. I already told you that sooner or later Roger and I will go our separate ways. I'll come back. The girls will not be harmed. I call it again. I looked at her. How about me? While you're having fun with Roger, how about me? Where's the love for me? What do you mean? Louise hesitated again. Louise, I'm a sensitive guy. You pulled away from me. We haven't had proximity for over 8 weeks. You haven't even kissed me in over 2 weeks. I don't feel any love at all right now. So what should I do? She looked at me as if the thought had never occurred to her. She didn't realize that I might need some attention and care. I don't know. She looked down. Roger says that for now I should belong only to him. I exploded. Again, my emotions rising in frustration, rage and sadness. Wait, so that's it? You will do this and not care about your husband? Cameron, this is not fair. I almost screamed, but she interrupted me. Are you going to say that? Denying me your husband over some piece of crap, cheating on your own husband and denying me your body is fair? Louise took another step back. I picked up my glass, drained it, and threw it at the concrete wall next to our barbecue. It shattered and I found myself shattered along with it. I sank back into the chair, my shoulders slumped, and I felt hot tears running down my cheeks. Neither of us said anything for several minutes until a loud car horn sounded from our driveway. I looked at Louise, noticing for the first time the hesitation on her face. I turned to look at the table, feeling like an empty shell. Just go away, I whispered. I don't know if she heard me or not, but when I turned around, my wife was no longer there. I think I didn't move for about half an hour. The confrontation with Louise devastated me more than I could have imagined. However, my phone, which was in my pocket, brought me to my senses. My daughter Carrie called, saying she had forgotten her bag of clothes for the weekend and that she and Robbie were on their way to our house to pick it up. Sorry, Dad. Mom's phone went to voicemail twice, so I thought I'd call you. She told me, happily chatting about the trip she and Robbie were taking this weekend. I sniffled, trying to pull myself together. It's okay, honey. Your mom isn't home right now, but your bag will be ready by the door, so you can take it and not waste time. She didn't answer right away. Dad. I sighed. Yes, dear. I tried to speak normally. She didn't buy it. Who is Roger? Carrie asked, a note of concern in her voice. Sorry. I meant Robbie. Sorry, Carrie, I meant Robbie. I stammered, unable to believe I made such a mistake. I tried to backtrack, but Carrie was a smart girl, and I was caught. What's happening? She asked, pausing when I didn't answer. Dad, you're bothering me, she said. It's okay, Carrie. I just didn't have a good day. First, I had some problems at work, then your mother and I had a disagreement. I'm just emotional, I answered. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to tell the whole story to my 18-year-old daughter. Dad, stop dodging the truth. You're trying to confuse me. What did Mom do? Her tone was accusing. I tried to brush her off. It doesn't matter, honey. I'll be fine. You just caught me off guard. I'll get your bag ready for you. Don't let her troubles ruin your weekend. Love you, Carrie. I quickly hung up, feeling like a jerk for trying to hide the truth from my daughter. I walked into the house, splashed some water on my face, then took Carrie's bag from her room, placing it right outside the garage door, where she knew I would put it so she could grab it and go. This wasn't the first time one of my girls had forgotten something. I picked up a broom and started cleaning up the shards of glass when Carrie came screaming through the back door and towards me. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, looking at me with a worried expression on her face. This was the look Louise used to give me when she was concerned, but it was a look I hadn't seen from her that evening, as she told me about her plans to be with another man. I shrugged, trying to leave her office, and went back to sweeping up the glass on the ground. "Of course, honey, I put your bag in the usual place," I said monotonously. I bent down and began sweeping the glass into a tray to throw it in the trash. When I stood up, Robbie was also standing in the doorway, frowning. I couldn't fool anyone. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Carrie pulled out a chair and sat across from me, grabbing both of my hands and squeezing them. "Dad, you're not okay." Mom called me shortly after I talked to you. I heard she was in the car and it sounded like someone else was with her, so what's going on? I looked at my daughter, realizing she saw something broken in my eyes. There she had disappeared. "Damn," my daughter almost screamed. "What's the matter, baby?" Robbie asked, sensing that his girlfriend was upset. He looked at me, but I still didn't say anything. I felt old and depressed. "My mother is cheating on my father," Carrie said as if nothing had happened. "No, really?" Both Carrie and Robbie looked at me. I nodded, slowly. "She gave me an ultimatum and then left with her lover sometime before you called me," I admitted gloomily. "They sat with me the rest of the night. At some point Rose and Toby arrived. Robbie showed up with takeout, a fresh bottle of cran and wine. I slowly told all four of them about Louise's betrayal, her ultimatum, and everyone was shocked." "Dad?" Carrie asked. "Doesn't Mom remember the marriage contract you both have?" "When Louise and I got married, I was starting my own printing business. My parents gave me 6 figures to help with the initial capital, and their lawyers drew up a prenuptial agreement. It stated that if one party cheated, she would walk away with nothing but her clothes and 15% of the marital property, while the offended party would keep the house, cars, and children during any separation or divorce. Louise had no claim to the business. I don't think your mom was thinking about anything at all, honey, remember? She told me that it wouldn't be cheating if she told me about it." Carrie snorted. "Dad, there's no excuse for cheating, whether she tells you or not. It sounds like she's been cheating on you emotionally for months now. Both Sarah and I have noticed that something has been off between you two for a few weeks now. We just couldn't understand it." I nodded, and then it dawned on me. "Oh my God, Sarah. I need to talk to her. I need to let her know that everything will be okay." Carrie grabbed my hands again. "Dad, please don't." "Why? Everything will be bad. Mom killed something in you today, and I don't know if I can forgive her for this. She's still your mom," I replied, my tone sounding more like a whine than anything else. "Mother or not, there's no reason to do what she did to you," she said sharply, then squeezed my hand again, softening. "Sarah and I will be fine. I'll talk to her in the morning." She also knew that something was wrong. We ate, and I found myself eating 3 portions of delicious Thai food, despite my mood. However, after eating and talking with Carrie, Robbie, Rose, and Toby, I must admit that I felt much better. "Everyone, do you mind if I talk to Cameron for a bit?" Rose asked later in the evening when the conversation had moved away from Louise, and I felt myself pulling away a little. The other 3 took this as their cue and headed inside. Rose, facing me, sat down in the chair that Carrie had vacated. I think she noticed the look on my face, then looked over her shoulder at the back door, where the others had gone, and then back at me, smiling. "You have an amazing daughter," Cameron Rose said. I nodded, looking at her. Rose was a beautiful red-haired woman. As I mentioned earlier, she was my first love. We dated for several years in high school until we went to different universities. She then fell in love with Toby, and shortly after that I met Louise. Until tonight, I was head over heels in love with my wife. The fact that Rose and I had dated before never bothered Louise or Toby. It was history and never interfered with anything. Rose and I were close despite, or because of our history, but neither of us would ever consider betraying our spouses. Having our kids' date strengthened our family cohesion. Carrie and Robbie knew a little about Rose and me dating when we were younger. None of us did this. We also knew that now that they were both 18, Carrie and Robbie were sleeping together, but we knew how much they cared for each other, so we didn't stand in their way. Rose patted my leg, bringing me back to the present moment. How are you, Kim? Don't lie to me. I know you almost better than anyone else. I shook my head. I don't know, Rose. I mean, I knew we had problems, but this. I pointed into the air, then more calmly. I still love her, Rose. I hate what she did to me, to us. I hate it, and I want to scream. I want to cry. I want to hurt her and her boyfriend. But right now, I still love her, I said hysterically. Rose nodded, now in full psychiatrist mode. How do you think you'll cope with this, Cam? She asked. I looked at her for a moment. Rose, stop this stupid psychiatric talk, I said, smiling sadly. It doesn't work on me. Besides, I've known you too long. She smiled back, bringing me out of my thoughts. But what can I do? Well, at least the breakup is at most a divorce subject to a full prenuptial agreement. I said I begged her to stay. I told her we could get some counseling, to which I received threats that she would take everything from me and turn my girls against me. Rose nodded. Kim, you're right. And I think you know that I can't be your advisor on this. I'm too close to both of you. So tomorrow, we'll think about finding you someone to talk to, but both Toby and I will be there for you through it all. You know, Toby and I think very highly of you. I'm sure Toby is now trying to dissuade your daughter from wanting to destroy her mother. I don't think we've seen Carrie this mad since Candy Taylor asked Robbie to the junior school dance. She laughed. I laughed quietly in response. You're right. Thank you, Rose. I'm sorry about this. You don't deserve to be in the middle of this, she reassured me. Don't worry, Kim. We are here for you. Believe me, if you were the one who abandoned Lewis, then we would do the same for her. We were talking about destroying you. I leaned back in my chair. Rose. I would never. Rose smiled at me. Relax, Kim. I know you wouldn't do this. That's why I felt free to say it. You and Toby are two of the most loyal people I've ever met, and if you two were anything like, I'd think you were brothers. Toby was relatively short, just over 5 feet, 10 inches, but stocky, muscular, with blonde hair and blue eyes. As for me, I have brown hair. Thanks to my job, I'm tall and fit, but still not in Toby's league. I think that's why I fell in love with him. His personality reminded me of you, she said thoughtfully, momentarily lost in memories. We both laughed. It was an old conversation that had long since ceased to be awkward, proving that Rose and I had a deep friendship. For the next hour, we discussed my feelings, mostly sadness and betrayal mixed with rage and a feeling of numbness that I couldn't explain. But Rose understood. We later walked inside to find Robbie and Carrie cozy on the couch. Toby sat in one of the lounge chairs, watching a movie. Hello everyone, I said in greeting. Carrie was immediately next to me, hugging me. Are you okay, Batty? She asked, worriedly. I looked at Rose, and she smiled. No honey, that's not true. But I'm so glad you're all here. It would be much worse if you weren't. She hugged me. Dad, Robbie, and I are going to stay here for the night. We don't want you to be alone. But, Carrie, what about your weekend? I asked. Robbie dismissed my concerns. Cameron, I can tell you that there's no other place Carrie and I would rather be right now. We can do the weekend anytime. I already canceled the reservation while you were talking to your mom, so we can reschedule the trip soon. But Carrie was right. In light of what happened, I think you need us here. Robbie said. I couldn't argue, and after that, we parted ways. For the evening, Rose and Toby said goodbye, promising to bring breakfast in the morning. I said good night to Carrie and Robbie, mentioning that I'd take a shower and read a little in bed to take my mind off things. We'll bring you coffee in the morning, Dad, Carrie said. I know I won't sleep well tonight, so I can only imagine how you're going to sleep. I smiled sadly at her, thanked her, hugged her again, kissed her forehead, and went to my room. I took a shower, finally took off my work clothes and returned to the bedroom with a sigh. The room was filled with reminders of Louise. To top it all off, she had left a few things on the bed that she hadn't put away when she got ready for the weekend without me. I tossed them on the floor or into the closet with the intention of packing them into boxes with the rest of her things. Tomorrow, I was lying in bed with my iPad, reading one of the latest books in the Spell Merchant series, a fantasy series I've been following for years, when my phone chirped for a moment. I thought it might be Louise, but it was Toby letting me know they were home and thinking about me. I thanked them with a thumbs up. He replied that they would be with us around 9 in the morning. I was about to hang up on, a thought occurred to me. I opened the Find My Phone app and sent a request to Louise's phone. It pinpointed a location a couple of hours' drive from here in the Blue Mountains. I sighed and took a screenshot of the request for my records to prove that she was running from me. This made me think about our security system. We had a sworn security system that recorded audio and video from cameras installed throughout the house, leading to a hard drive in the closet. We had 8 cameras located throughout the house. The ones in the yard were set up to send Louise and me an email if they detected movement. However, all cameras recorded all the time until the hard drive was full, and then the cameras began to overwrite earlier content. The disk itself contained up to a week's worth of footage for all 8 cameras. I logged in, checked the backyard camera from earlier that evening, and, sure enough, the camera had captured Louise and me discussing her infidelity. As I walked out into the yard, I also checked the live feed and saw a big guy step out of a brand new BMW, greet Louise with a kiss and then drive off. Now I had an ironclad confession and a video of her leaving me to be with Roger, proving that she was not at my location. I pulled out my laptop, logged into Swan's security system, and exported the video via email, along with instructions to begin the divorce process. As I was struggling with the wording from my lawyer and had just attached the video to an email, my phone rang. It was Louise. She must have still been awake and heard the tone from Find My Phone. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, I received a voicemail notification. I played it. Cameron, Roger and I heard your phone ring. We tell you not to do anything stupid. Sooner or later, we'll finish and we can talk. Then you can do everything my way. If you do anything differently than I tell you, Roger will destroy you, and I will take everything from you. I heard Louise say this, along with Roger giggling in the background. Yes, little boy, trust me, this won't last forever. However, if you say anything to anyone, I will have a personal interest in picking you apart until you lose everything: your wife, your kids, your business. And let's not forget any respect you ever thought you had. When Louise and I are finished, she will return to you. Just play ball and everything will be fine. Now, Louise and I need to get back to making love. As they disconnected, I heard them both laughing. For a moment I sat stunned. I've heard a lot of rude things over the years, but this guy's disrespect and outright arrogance triggered something in me. I decided it was time for their destruction rather than my own. I finalized the email by noting that not only did I want the divorce papers served on Louise and her work as soon as possible, but I also wanted to file a lawsuit against Roger. My search revealed that there's no alienation of affection law in Australia, but I wanted my lawyer to do something about it. I wanted them to hurt I also wanted Louise and Roger's firm to be sued for loss of income in my own business due to the fact that they either encouraged the affair or were unaware of the misconduct, which caused me mental distress, and my business to suffer as a result. I knew that the lawsuits would most likely come to nothing. However, simply suing all parties in addition to the divorce and enforcing the prenuptial agreement would do great damage to the arrogance of this couple. When I hit send, I knew I didn't have the details on Roger's wife yet, but if I could find them, I would contact her to let her know what a cheater husband was. I wish I could say that after I sent the email, I slept well knowing I was taking action against scammers. But that would be a lie. I tossed and turned until the sun came up, and I even heard Carrie and Robbie get up before I finally closed my eyes. I listened and realized that Robbie was heading to his car to get the promised coffee. I put on my pants and shirt and headed to the kitchen. When I entered the room, Carrie saw me and hugged me tightly, asking if I had slept. I shook my head. "Me neither," she replied. "I tried, but I just couldn't. I just don't understand how Mom could do this to you," she complained. "I mean, all of us, not just you." We talked for a while about her university education, trying to avoid the topic, until Robbie returned with 3 very welcome large cups of coffee. I sipped the magnificent drink. I've always loved cappuccino, and the chocolate on top just enhanced the flavor as it danced across my taste buds. Carrie and I sighed in unison and Robbie laughed. "You're both exactly the same," he said. Then he became serious. "So you weren't sleeping, either?" "No, actually. I was very busy, emailing with my company's lawyer, when I received a voicemail from Louise," I explained. After making a Find My Phone request, I spent the next 10 minutes explaining how I had put together a package of documents to begin the process of divorcing Louise and Roger in their workplace. Listening to the voicemail Louise and Roger had left me, I saw Carrie try to hold back her tears. "This woman is not my mother," she said, quietly, wiping her eyes with a coffee napkin. "My mother would never be so cold as to insult my father or allow another man to humiliate her husband like that." Robbie and I wholeheartedly agreed. It was around 10:00 in the morning when we began to wonder where Rose and Toby were. They had told us they would bring breakfast around 9:00, so an hour later we were worried. Robbie tried calling his mother first and then his father. When he couldn't get through, I tried calling them too. I called Mom's house in the breakfast cafe. We always went to the owner of the cafe, Josie. An elderly lady in her 60s whom we all knew well, confirmed that Rose and Toby had breakfast at her place around 8:30 on their way to my place. When I hung up the phone, I started to get really worried. I was grabbing my keys so we could go find them, when Robbie's phone rang. He picked it up and a minute later, he was lying on the floor with a pale face. I took the phone from him. "Hello, this is Cameron. I'm the father of Robbie's girlfriend." "Who am I speaking to?" I asked. "Mr. Other, this is Police Constable Colin Sharp. I have sad news. I need to inform Robert that his parents were in a serious accident." The officer said. I sucked in a sharp breath, looking at Robbie, who was lying almost comatose on the ground. Carrie hugged him with one arm, looking up at me desperately. "Are Rose and Toby all right, Constable?" I asked. There was a pause. "Mr. Other, I take it that Robert can't speak right now?" the officer asked. I confirmed this. "Can you get Robert to give me verbal consent so that I can discuss this matter with you?" she asked. I managed to get Robbie to say yes. The officer paused, catching her breath. "This morning at about 8:45, an uncontrollable 2-section road train crashed into the car on the driver's side, which had failed brakes as a result of the accident. Their car was practically destroyed. I'm sorry to say that Mrs. Getting is currently in surgery. Unfortunately, Mr. Getting is no longer with us." It felt like my world had turned pale. I sank to the floor just like Robbie. Toby was dead and Rose was in surgery. I cleared my throat. Which hospital? I asked hoarsely. They are both at the Royal North Coast Hospital. May I assume that you and Robert will be there soon? She asked. I heard a note of sadness in her voice. She was a professional, but I could tell this officer was struggling with her emotions. Yes, I croaked. I learned the details about where to go and what to say when we arrived. 5 minutes later, the three of us were out the door. I stuck to the speed limit, even though I should have slowed down. Half an hour later, we were in the trauma department of the hospital. The nurses did their best to calm us down. We repeatedly asked questions such as, how is Rose doing? Where is Toby's body? Will Rose survive? And what about the other driver? Constable Sharp entered and introduced herself. We talked for the next 20 minutes. Once again, Robbie allowed me to act as his representative. She told me that Toby had died on the way to the hospital from multiple injuries. Accidents like this are terrible, she said. Rose was also in critical condition. The rest of the day passed in a form of conversations and calls. I had to give Robbie credit. After the initial shock, he sat with me all day while we waited for news about Rose, and began calling people. We called his grandparents first, then Toby's brother in Brisbane, and then we called Rose's brother. When the people from the funeral home arrived, Carrie and I had to help Robbie fill out forms regarding the death of his father. Carrie called Sarah, and an hour later she was at the hospital hugging Robbie and crying with Carrie. After a while, she looked at us and asked innocently, "Where's Mom?" Carrie and I exchanged glances. "She won't come," Carrie said bitterly. Sarah looked at Carrie, and then at me. "I take it this is because of Roger?" my youngest daughter asked glumly. Carrie and I were shocked. When everything that could possibly go wrong did go wrong, it felt overwhelming. "Sarah, are you saying that you know something about your mother and Roger?" I asked quietly. Sarah nodded seriously, tears streaming down her face. "I saw Mom bring new underwear a couple of weeks ago. I asked if she bought it for you, Dad. She got mad at me and then blurted out that it was for a date with some guy named Roger, telling me there was no way in hell you'd ever see that underwear." "Sarah, why didn't you say anything?" Carrie's tone was accusatory. If my youngest daughter's posture could have been any lower, she would have become a puddle on the ground. "I don't know," Sarah said, looking at Carrie. "We talked about how Mom and Dad have separated lately. I didn't know what to do, so I tried to stay away from home as much as possible. Once I found out what I didn't want to know, I didn't want to look my mother in the eye." She looked at me. "Forgive me, Dad." I pulled her into my arms. "It's okay, baby. I sure wish you would have told me something. I didn't know anything until last night, but it's okay." She started crying. "I'm so sorry, Dad. If I had said something, maybe Aunt Rose and Uncle Toby." She never finished her thought and seemed to break down further. We left late in the evening just to shower and change clothes. I dropped Carrie and Sarah off at home, and then we sorted things out. Carrie drove back to the hospital with Sarah, and I followed. I think it was around 4 o'clock on Sunday morning when Rose was brought out of the operating room. Rose would be in the ICU for at least a few days. They wanted her to wake up so they could make sure she had no brain damage before taking the next steps. Even in his grief, Robbie was kind to the doctors and asked to meet the surgical team who worked for hours to save his mother's life. I had never been more proud of my daughter's boyfriend and truly hope that one day I could call him my son-in-law. We spent the rest of the day in the hospital. I grabbed my laptop and phone chargers from home. Once online, I received confirmation that the documents had been completed and were ready to be sent to Louise, Roger and their firm on Monday morning. I was glad that I had a damn good lawyer, better than Roger, who I had previously relied on. I also contacted my duty managers at work, making sure they would take over the workload for the week due to the family tragedy. and that I needed some time off. I didn't tell them that I had more than one emergency, but they knew their stuff and kept working. One piece of good news was that over the course of Saturday, one of my support staff managed to fix the remaining issues on the machine that had broken down. On Friday, that same day, we began working with Robbie to plan Toby's funeral. Robbie sent a message to their family lawyer to receive instructions. It wouldn't have been necessary if Rose had pulled through, but Robbie wanted to be prepared for anything. We talked about the funeral for several hours. Later in the afternoon, we were joined by Edna, Rose's mother, an older woman in her early 70s, but as perceptive as ever. She hugged her grandson, and then hugged me tightly. Edna always treated me like a son. She loved Toby, but always spoke in a joking tone about me as the one who ran away from her daughter. She told us that Camilla, Toby's mom, would be coming later in the week, as soon as she could find someone to take her from the retirement village, since she couldn't drive. We talked easily all day. Edna sat with us in the hospital, waiting room as planned. I wondered if the staff would move us out of there, but when I asked the nurse if we needed to move, she shook her head. No. This unfortunately happens more often than you might expect. But if it's not too busy, then you can stay. We know what grief you're all going through right now. I know that you need to be closer to Mrs. Getting while you wait for her to wake up. I smiled at her answer, thanking her. Time flew by as we all talked and reminisced. Luis was only mentioned in passing, and after Carrie had brought Edna up to speed with Luis, a dark, scowling expression appeared on her face whenever she was not being observed. It was about 8:00 on Sunday evening when I answered a call on my cell phone without looking. Our phones had been ringing all day as news of Toby's death and Rose's injuries spread. "Hey, this is Cameron," I said, watching as Robbie hugged Carrie, smiling as I observed the two young lovers looking into each other's eyes. I saw the exchange of loving glances between them. They were falling more and more in love with each other. "This is not the best way to protect your wife," I heard Luis scolding me on the phone. "I told you not to make waves, otherwise you'll regret it. Roger's fierce and will kill you if you say anything to anyone." "Where the hell are you, Cameron? You should have been home when I got back." I don't know what happened to Luis over the weekend, but if there was any uncertainty or regret left from Friday night, it was eliminated by the obstinate woman now speaking to me on the phone. "Luis," I said, contempt dripping from my voice. All conversations around me stopped, and everyone looked at me. "Yes, it's me, you great fool. Where are you and where are the girls? If you tell them anything I told you, I'll turn them against you. So you'd better come home now or I'll make you regret it." I stopped mid-sentence. I wasn't interested in her threats. Tomorrow, Luis would learn that her neatly constructed story had fallen apart. The cheater had just returned home. I shrugged. "We heard, Dad," Sarah said quietly. "I don't even know why you answered the call today." I spent several hours talking one-on-one with my youngest daughter. She apologized repeatedly for not telling me, but once she heard the full extent of the deception from her mother, she became almost as angry with her as Carrie was. "Dad, if I divorce, I will live with you, okay?" Sarah suddenly told me. "Of course, baby, of course," I replied, hugging her. Returning to the present, I looked at Sarah. It was instinct. I answered the call without hesitation. It just took me a while to get my bearings. The next moment my phone rang again. Luis, of course. Over the next 10 minutes she tried calling a dozen times. Then she tried to call the girls. After half an hour, Carrie got tired of it. "What?" she shouted into the phone, picking up the receiver. Luis chastised their eldest daughter for her tone. "Mom, stop it. I have absolutely no interest in talking to such a lying traitor right now. I'm here with my family, including my sister and father. We are in mourning, and we don't need you to fit into our grief." I heard Luis scream into the phone, hurling curses that I never knew she could say, let alone say, to her daughter. She seemed to think Carrie was talking to her about the breakdown. of the relationship between me and Luis, rather than about Toby's and Rose's situation, whose lives hung in the balance. I realized that Luis had no idea what had happened. Luis continued to yell for another moment before Carrie interrupted her. "Mom, I'm not going to let you yell at me anymore. And before you start, yes, Dad told us everything, too. So know that I have no interest in living in the same house as you. You had a man who loved you just as much as your children and adored you as a role model. Now you've treated your dad for a boyfriend who will most likely drop you like a hot potato, and you've lost the respect of both of your daughters." She paused, obviously waiting for her mother's response. "Yes, both Sarah and me." Yes, Sarah told us what she knew. "My dad is amazing because he forgave her, and right now, she hates you as much as Dad and I do. So pack your bags, Mom, because none of us want you there when we get home." She stopped again, listening. "No, Mom, I won't tell you where we are or when we'll return home. Why don't you call Roger and go to his house?" She made a mock pause. "What, you can't?" "Because he went home to his wife, who has no idea that he's a sneaky, cheating freak who helped you destroy any respect your family has for you." "Too bad, Mom." Louise began to answer, but Carrie cut her off. "Sorry, Mom. I think we're being called. I'll talk to you later." She then turned off the phone, looked at us, all staring at her, and pointed to her phone in her hand. "Wrong number," Carrie said simply. Despite the gravity of the situation, everyone chuckled, even the nurses at the station across from us. Edna went home for the night, promising she would return early in the morning. Meanwhile, Sarah and I prepared to leave for a few hours. Carrie and Robbie remained in the hospital. Later, Sarah and I returned around midnight, switched places, and let Carrie and Robbie get some sleep. Sarah and I were putting our gear back into our bags when the trauma nurse arrived. She woke up the nurse and, excitedly, we all smiled and let out a nervous laugh. We then asked about Rose's condition. "She is currently being examined by a doctor. She's really out of it, but since she's awake, you'll all be able to see her for a little while." For the next hour, we gathered around to see Rose, or what we could have her. "Hey, Petal," I said, using my nickname for Rose. When we first met, I called her my Rose Petal. If anyone other than me ever called her that, they'd always get a beating from her. "You gave us a real scare, but it's good to see that you're on the mend." She could not yet speak, with the breathing tube in her throat. Of course, she was also still heavily sedated, likely from some powerful illegal substances. But there was a question in her eyes that I didn't want to answer. I shook my head and she understood. A single tear rolled out of her left eye, quickly soaking into the bandages. For the rest of my visit, I was unable to touch her. I sat with her quietly, talking about how proud I was of her, how she was my family, and how we were all going to be better people together. I was exhausted when I left the room and the nurse handed me a tissue. I cried, but I didn't even realize it. I thanked her and returned to the waiting room. Half an hour later, Sarah and I hugged Carrie and Robbie and headed home. Sarah and I were dead tired. We had only about 3 hours of sleep before heading back to the hospital to let Carrie and Robbie rest. Although now that Rose was awake, we all felt some relief. We smiled as we drove, talking about the dream and how happy we were that Rose was awake, but then we both frowned as we pulled into our street. There was an unfamiliar BMW X5 parked in her driveway. Damn, we both cursed at the same time. I saw that the headlights were on, so I drove past, turned around, and pulled over to the side of the road in front of our house. We saw the curtains move, but not a single door opened. "Should we go in or should we just leave?" Sarah asked me. I shrugged, then sighed. "We need to go in." "Sorry, honey, but I'm not sure it would be safe for me to drive today without rest or caffeine, so I suggest we enter. You head to your room, close the door, and try to ignore what I'm sure will be a bad conversation." "Are you sure, Dad? Can I stay with you?" I smiled. Sarah hated confrontation, which was one of the reasons she hadn't told me. But the fact that she was willing to confront her mother with me showed how upset my 15-year-old daughter was with her. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. Sarah looked at me and did the same with her phone. We both got out of the car and walked down the path to the front door. It was unlocked, and we entered. Not even 2 seconds after we crossed the threshold, Roger's voice rang out. "Good fellow Cameron, here he is, the little cuckold himself. Come back to apologize and play catch before I ruin your life," he said coldly, with the arrogance of a man who got what he wanted, despite any objections. Sarah entered the room, causing Roger to stop abruptly. Louise hesitated for a moment. "If you don't mind, Dad, I'm too tired for this. I'll go to bed and make sure you're up by 12:30 so we can go back," she said. She walked past the stunned Roger and Louise, saying only a few insulting words to both of them before shutting her door. As soon as Sarah's door closed, they attacked me again. "Louise told you not to tell your daughter anything, you idiot," Roger said, glaring at me. I picked up my phone. "I'm letting you know that I'm recording this conversation. The recording has been going on since we walked through the door and will continue until you leave," I said, looking at both of them. Louise turned pale as she looked at the phone in my hand, and Roger shrugged. "It doesn't matter," Roger said with a smile. Roger was an impressive man, taller and broader than me. However, most of his body was fat rather than muscle. He was also balding and had wrinkles on his chin. I'd say he was in his 40s, maybe early 50s. To be honest, I struggled to understand why Louise would get involved with someone like him. I ignored Roger for a moment and looked straight at my wife, Louise. "I asked you not to be here when I returned home tonight. And in return, you insult me even more by bringing your lover here. Is there really no depth to your depravity?" "Cameron," she began, but Roger interrupted her. He took 2 steps forward until he was in front of my face. "You listen here. We both told you how it would be and told you not to say anything. Now I'm going to make your life hell." He spoke loudly, not caring that a 15-year-old girl could overhear. "Mr. Fellworth, isn't it?" I said calmly, looking him in the face. "You are not welcome here. I will ask you to watch your language, as my minor daughter is in the other room." "So what the hell?" he yelled. "She won't tell anyone and neither will you." With that, he snatched the phone from my hand, threw it on the ground, and stomped on it before I could do anything. He then smiled evenly at me and started yelling, "You're just some village printer who bored his wife so much that she begged me to be with her." He smiled menacingly at me as I looked at my crushed phone on the floor. Louise decided to join in. I had no idea what Roger had done to her, but she was by no means my wife anymore, based on the words she spoke. "Cameron, it's true. Roger's 10 times a better lover than you, but you told the girls, and it's going to be very hard for you. I wish you hadn't said anything, because now Roger and I will have to destroy you." "Louise, what are you?" I didn't have time to finish because while I was looking at Louise, good old Roger attacked me. Sarah heard the crash and left her room. "Honey, please, could you go call 911? Tell them that your father was attacked and I protected both of us. Could you also let them know that we have a recording of the entire incident and that we expect the police and ambulance here as soon as possible?" I said. Sarah, who had now escaped Louise's grasp, ran back to her room and slammed the door. "Good girl," I muttered, then turned to Roger. "Listen here, you took my wife and came to my house, thinking that I would be something that I'm not. You have no idea what you've unleashed and how I'm going to ruin your pathetic life. Do you think you're a big man? I just made you a woman. What have you done?" Louise screamed. "Cameron, what the hell did you do to Roger?" I shrugged, looking at the woman who, just a few months ago, I would have given my life for. Today, I wouldn't even pee on her if she was on fire. "It doesn't matter, Louise. Tonight, you and that idiot didn't even ask about me or my daughters before you both attacked me. You didn't ask Sarah how she was feeling or where any of us had been. You just went along with this and his plans." She gazed at me, bending over her fallen lover. After a few moments of silence, I filled the dead air. "Aren't you going to ask?" "Let me tell you. Because you ran off with that fat freak for the weekend. Our daughter and her boyfriend came to spend time with me. She's not stupid and knew something was wrong, even when I tried to deny it. Soon Rose and Toby were here too." "Oh, Cameron, you didn't," she whined. "No, I didn't do that. Carrie and Robbie did it. They are smart, intelligent, and can read between the lines," I replied. "Anyway, they came to be there for me, unlike you." Then they went home later that night, promising to bring breakfast on Saturday morning while we figured out what to do with you and your lover. I pointed my finger at Roger, who was groaning on the floor. "Anyway," I said, drawing out the words, "no one." I was getting to the hard part. My voice became quiet. "Rose and Toby were driving here with breakfast for Mom when they were hit by an out-of-control truck. Toby is dead and Rose is fighting for her life in the hospital. It was all over the news. So if you and your crazy person had bothered to watch the news or even ask us, you might have found out that, because of you, one of our friends is dead, and the other, the 1st of May, not survive." I let it sink in, but after a moment, Luis had the nerve to scream at me, "It's not my fault, Cameron. We asked you not to say anything. If you had kept your mouth shut, they would still be alive. It's your fault. They're dead, not mine." "No, Mom, it's your fault," our daughter said, standing in the doorway. She looked at me. "The police and ambulance are on their way." She looked at her mother again. "I have no idea who you are, but you are not my mother. It's your fault that Uncle Toby died, not Dad's. If you hadn't cheated on your dad, this would never have happened." She looked at her hands. "And this is also my fault. Maybe if I told my dad right away, he could have stopped it." "Sarah." I began to speak. "No, Dad. I know I should have said something, but the blame lies with her," she said, pointing at her mother. She retreated back to her room, and Louise and I just stared at each other. We could now hear the emergency sirens blaring. No one said anything as 2 police cars arrived, and suddenly there was chaos everywhere. Louise tried to explain that I was the one who attacked Roger. When asked if he was her husband, she stammered and explained that the husband was me, but still I was the one who beat Roger. I presented my version. An ambulance arrived and Roger was carried out on a stretcher. The ambulance left and I think the police were close to arresting me because I was the guy who attacked someone. My wife screamed again that it was all my fault. When Sarah came back into the room, she said to the officer interrogating us, "I'm sorry, Mr. Officer, but I have a recording here that confirms everything my father said, including that this man said he would kill my father and that my mother would lie to protect him from my father." She handed the officer a USB drive. "What? How did Roger break your phone?" Louise screamed, not realizing that the police were still in the room and could hear her. "Mom, Dad had a feeling that something might happen, so when I went to my room, I placed my phone at the base of the door so I could record everything." She looked at the officer. "I'm sorry to say that after listening to everything my mother said, I don't feel safe around her. Please, can you not force me to stay with her? She said she would support this man no matter what he did to Dad. I heard him hit my father, so I'm scared," Sarah said, coming up to me and hugging me while simultaneously throwing daggers at her mother. After that, nothing mattered anymore. Although underage, Sarah had all the evidence and made a statement against Louise. So my wife was arrested and taken to the police station overnight. When Louise was taken out, she looked at me angrily, but did not say anything. After everything that happened, we didn't have time to sleep. But no matter how tired I was, we took a shower and changed clothes. Then I drank coffee and we drove back to the hospital. When we entered Rose's room, Carrie and Robbie were sitting on 2 chairs, leaning on each other. When Carrie saw my face, she gasped. "What happened, Dad?" she asked when she saw it. We spent the next few minutes explaining her mother and Roger's visit. We heard Rose's muffled grunt and found her awake, her eyes looking at me with sadness. "Rose?" I muttered. "I'm sorry. If I'd known you were awake." I fell silent, realizing that I was talking about Toby's death in her presence. Of course, she knew I had admitted it earlier, but I still should have been more sensitive. "Are you okay, Rosé? Can I get you anything? Do you need a nurse?" I asked, then added, "Blink once to say yes and twice to say no." She blinked twice, slowly, then 3 times, pressing her whole fingers to my hand. I did not move for the rest of the night. The next 2 weeks flew by very quickly. Louise's parents got her out of jail, on bail the next day, and then called me every name they could until Carrie put them in their place. When Louise returned to work a few days later, she was just in time for the boss to serve her with divorce papers and to see him filing suit against the owner of the company. As a result, Louise found herself on unpaid leave, suspended from work pending the outcome of the case. By the end of the day, she was living in her parents' spare room. She returned to the house while Carrie and Robbie were relaxing there. They watched her like hawks as she gathered a few things and then took the walk of shame back to her parents' waiting car. Carrie hugged her grandparents, but made it clear that her mother would never be welcome in the house again. In Carrie's opinion, after Roger's fight with me, she not only saw that her mother was shameless, but also that she was guilty because of the accident. It wasn't until the end of the first week that doctors decided to remove the breathing tube from Rose's throat. When they did this, her first words were addressed to me. "Cameron, are you okay?" I waved it off. "Rose, how can you ask this?" She smiled sadly. "It's okay, honey. I knew about Toby before you told me. I hope beyond all hope." In the first moments after the accident, we were stunned, but then we came to our senses. We confess our love to each other. Somehow he knew that he wouldn't be able to get out, but I could. Now she was crying. After I woke up the first time, I wasn't myself, but I remember how your eyes confirmed that he was gone. I sat down on the chair next to the bed, taking the right hand, still injured, and kissing it, unlike her missing left hand. She whispered to me in a conspiratorial tone, "Even though it was just the 2 of us in the room at the moment, last night I had a dream that Toby came to me. He was beautiful, unharmed, and looked fine." She smiled. "He told me that everything was okay, then his time had come and that no one was to blame for the accident, not even Louise." I looked at her and her smile faded a little. "I know, just like Toby, that there's no need to blame anyone. Anyway, he told me that he loves me, but now it's my job to take care of you, Cameron. He truly loved you like a brother and was so upset about what happened to you." I looked at her. "Rose, you're the one needs to be looked after. Seriously, haven't you noticed that you're missing an arm?" She laughed, lifting her stump slightly. "I'm pretty harmless now, aren't I? There was nothing I could do about it." I snorted. "I guess it's my job now to help you when you need it," I retorted. She groaned and then laughed good-naturedly. "I'm serious, Kim. I miss you terribly, but in that dream I felt peaceful. He made me promise to look after you." I raised my hands and she giggled. "Okay, you win. You can keep an eye on me," I said. Rose looked satisfied. "But only after you leave here. Until then, it's my job to look after you." Unlike those first 2 weeks, the next few months passed slowly. If I wasn't at work, I was at the hospital with Rose. If I wasn't at the hospital, I was packing my things at home. The girls and I decided that we would sell the house and move. There was a place near Crow's Nest in North Sydney that I managed to find for a reasonable price, and I also got a decent deal on our current location. The new house was smaller, but close to transport and a medical center. It had 3 bedrooms plus a study nook, and if you looked out of the master bedroom window while standing on your tiptoes, you could see Sydney Harbor in the distance. Might have sourced from. Louise was in full swing. The girls refused to have anything to do with her. The few calls they had with their mother ended badly. For Louise, Sarah, our easygoing daughter, became tough as nails, and from whenever her mother was mentioned. Over the past month, Carrie had almost moved in with Robbie, which I didn't mind. Even though Louise had already told me about it a dozen times, calling me names in between. She was not very happy living in her parents' house, in the spare bedroom. Her parents called me a couple of times to see if I could reconcile, but after I played them the audio from Sarah's phone from that night with Roger and Louise, they apologized and stopped trying to solve our problems. While Louise's life was on a downward spiral, Roger's life felt like a stone sinking to the bottom of a pond. He wanted to take legal action against me, but the police told him that he could sue me, but it would end badly for him because he was at fault for what happened. I could easily make a case for my home and family. After a week-long review, his company immediately fired him for bringing them into disrepute. They did this to try to get me to drop my lawsuit against them. However, my lawyer negotiated a settlement with them. Roger's wife, too, somehow got hold of a copy of the recording. I swear it wasn't me, but Sarah gave me sly glances several times. I had no idea how she found out, but one evening, a certain Miranda Ward, though, who had been cheating on her several times, finally, in hard evidence, it turned out that most of Worth's money came from Marina's grandparents' trust, which had helped Roger get into law school many years ago. Because it was a family trust that he was not a part of, Miranda told me that he would not receive anything. They also had children, one of whom dreamed of becoming a lawyer, but Miranda suspected that this might not be the case once he learned of his father's womanizing ways. Now Roger was living in a cheap hotel on a credit card that was nearing its limit. He wasn't having much success finding a new job, and I sincerely hoped it would stay that way. Rose was getting a little better every day, so that a month after the accident, she was able to leave the hospital for a few hours with a nurse so we could all say a formal goodbye to Toby. It was strange, we were all sad, but Rose, of all people, smiled a lot. She laughed with the others at the stories they told, and when she cried, she always made the other person feel better. At the funeral, I made sure that I was the one pushing Rose's wheelchair when she greeted people. Her nurse smiled and gave way to me so I could help Rose, but she didn't move more than a few steps away from us. Another month after the funeral, I was sitting in Rose's hospital room, doing bills and paperwork when I felt her gaze on me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I put down the bill I was working on. "What's the matter, Rosé? Do you need something?" I asked, turning to face her. When I turned to look at her, I was surprised. Rose looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Cameron," she tried to say. I instantly found myself nearby, my arms hugging her. I held her while she cried. I looked at her monitors, except for a slightly increased heartbeat. She was fine. It was emotional. The hospital psychiatrist said that this could happen from the moment she woke up. She worried about others rather than herself. "Rose, everything will be fine. I'm here. You have me. You'll never have to walk alone, you know that," I said, consoling her. She cried even harder and nodded, holding on to me, with her good hand, now free of bandages. "I know, Cameron. You know, I just miss him." She looked at me pleadingly. "I know, Rose. Trust me, I know. Toby was my best friend. I miss him. When Louise did what she did, if it weren't for you and Toby," she hugged me tighter. "Will it get better?" She said this in a moment of pain and weakness. "I don't know," I answered quietly. "I want to believe that it will happen. Toby is gone, but you are here, and we have our children. This must mean something." For a moment, she said nothing. Then I felt her relax. Thank you, Kim. I don't know if I could have held it together without you. You know, you get wiser as you get older. She giggled quietly and nervously. I stroked her hair for a moment, running my hands to a thick, curly mane of red hair, then leaned down and kissed the top of her head. You're welcome, Rose. Without Toby, with this and Luis in my life, I find that I need a best friend. Are you interested in this? I asked, still holding her close. Rose did the last thing I expected. She reached over and kissed me. Rose, I'm sorry. You're my best friend, really, my oldest friend, and I love you so much, but I don't know. Damn, we're still mourning Toby, she sighed, clinging to me without thinking. I hugged her as we sat in her hospital bed. I know, Kim. I understand what you were saying, but I feel something. It never went away after school, she said. That night I fell into a restless sleep. I must have tossed and turned for several hours, until I finally entered what I somehow immediately knew was sleep. I dreamed of a bar that I had never seen before. It was a big bar, and I had a feeling that if I tried to walk from end to end, I would be walking for a long time. There were tables everywhere, and many people sat and drank, played darts or billiards. The problem was that they were all out of focus. I knew they were there. I even said hello to a few people I passed by. I even received greetings from vaguely shaped people. I realized that they were smiling at me, but no matter what, they remained out of sight. Besides, it was a pleasant dream, and I was thinking about going to the bar when I noticed someone who wasn't blurry. He was sitting at a table alone as I approached him. He turned and stood up to greet me. Toby? I exclaimed, rushing to hug him, but a moment before I did, I abruptly stopped. He laughed at me. I'm glad to see you, Cam. Everything is fine. You can hug me. We hugged, then I pulled him away, looking at him. He looked as good as he did the night before the accident. He caught me examining him and laughed again. You look good, buddy, I said. For some reason I know this is a dream, but I'm so glad to see you. He smiled. Then we sat down at the table. There was a kind of Coca-Cola in front of me. Toby had a pint of Guinness. We slowly sipped our drinks. He sighed. Okay, he looked at me. How are you, Kim? He asked. I was a little blown away. The dream had become a reality. Not very good, buddy, I said. Divorce from Louise is painful. The girls get angry all the time. I'm trying to support Rose in her recovery, but it's hard, and I feel like I'm just drowning in it all. Toby nodded. What about you and Rosé? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I sat back in my chair to think about the dream version of Toby for a minute. He smiled at me, raising an eyebrow. What about us? I asked. Come on, Cam. We've been friends for more years than I can imagine. You are my closest friend. I know things about you and Rose that would make anyone blush. I know that you two love each other. I snorted. Of course, Toby, she is as close to me as you and Louise. Without you two in my life, she is now my closest friend. I want to see her get better. He sighed. I understand, Kim. But what about the kiss this afternoon that got you so worried before you fell asleep and came here? You can't say it didn't mean anything, can you? Of course, my subconscious conjure up the image of my best friend throwing the kiss of me to make me feel guilty about it. I looked at my friend. I know it was more than nothing. Toby, I love her. Always have. He smiled at me. I panicked, mate. Rose was married to you. Luis was married to me. Sure. We dated and even gave each other our first kisses. But, Toby, we're talking about your wife. How can I cheat on you with her? Cameron, he said seriously, I'm dead. His tone was sad but decisive. You two can't cheat on me. Rose still has so many years left. She needs someone who will love her and protect her as much as I do. Look, Cameron, you said it yourself that Luis has left your life or will soon leave, and you really love Rose. He looked at me for a moment, and it seemed to me that it was the real Toby Wayne, something important to say and not some figment of my imagination. Rose loves you too, Cameron. Of course, she is hurt by my death, but she desperately clings to the hope that you will not abandon her. She cherishes you in her heart with the same love she has for me. Indeed, she may love you more than me, since you have known her much longer. I'm serious, he said. I didn't know what to say. You know, he leaned towards me as if he was about to tell me a secret. If Rose and I hadn't met when you two were apart, she would have tracked you down and then forced you to marry her. What? I said, almost choking on the rum. How the hell do you know this? She told me. He smiled. I was outraged by my best friend's dream. How could she tell you? You're just some dream of my best friend, that for some reason, my dormant mind is using to help me process everything. Rose never told me anything about this, so how could you know? Toby laughed. Cam, look around at the walls of this pub. This is not just a dream, and I'm not just a figment of your tortured mind, he said. I replied, Cam, it's true. I'll prove it to you. How? I answered skeptically. He held up 3 fingers. 3 points, he said with a hint of humor in his voice. First of all, he raised his index finger. When you get to the hospital tomorrow, asked Rose what the last words I said to her were. I snorted. I already know that you were in the car and told each other that you loved each other. Toby smiled, shaking his head. Well, that's partly true. But after that, when we both realized that I wouldn't succeed, I calmed down. Somehow, I knew that Rose would see the next day, and my last words were, love, Cameron, for the rest of your life. I started to answer, but Toby raised his hand, this time holding up a second finger. Secondly, tomorrow when you are in the hospital, Luis will appear. It won't be pretty. Toby, there is no way. Third, he said, interrupting me, this time raising 3 fingers, my mom is going to bring you in, Rose, one of those amazing chicken salad sandwiches from the Asian place on North Harbor. She'll let you know that she was thinking about you both while she was driving. She will be wearing yellow sandals. I looked at my friend. He laughed at me again. Toby, how can you know? Since this is a dream and you're dead? I asked my friend. He touched the tip of his nose as if it were a secret. Honestly, I'm not allowed to talk, he told me. It's a miracle that I was even allowed to meet Rose and you, but I was asked to meet with you, so here I am. I'm happy to spend some more time with you. I didn't believe him, but I had to admit that I was glad to tell him that I was glad to see him too. So if this happens, then what should I do? Marry her? I asked. Toby laughed again. That's your business, my friend, but if you marry Rose, you would have my blessing. He took his drink and dragged me out of the booth and over to the dartboard. This is something I couldn't say while I was alive, but love her fiercely. Cam, make me proud to be your best friend no matter what you choose. It seemed to me that for the next hour we played darts, drank, and at one point I think sang songs from the bar. Some of the visitors even joined us, although I still can't remember them clearly, except for one other guy. It felt like he was looking after the place or playing an important role here, whatever it was. But while we were drinking and dancing, the pub disappeared from sight. My last memory was Toby leaning over me as we said goodbye, hugging me and thanking me for being his friend. I woke up with hot tears streaming down my face. I was sad but also happy. This time I even managed to say goodbye to him. By the time I had shaved and dressed, I had almost forgotten about the dream. I stopped by the office to confer with my managers. Everyone knew I was spending a lot of time in Rose's hospital room and also completing the move over the next few weeks. My assistant prepared all my paperwork for today, accepted the ones I had worked on yesterday, and then led me into a conference room where I worked with my managers for an hour before heading to the hospital. It was around lunchtime when I arrived. Rose smiled as I walked into the room. Doctors told her that although she still had a long way to go, she would be able to return home in a few weeks. She complained that she had been tired of the hospital bed for several days, and although they managed to place a bed for her next to the window, she wanted to get out of the four walls. I was happy for her. If she could get settled at home, it would help her a lot. We were talking about how she would fall asleep in her bed when Toby's mom, Camilla, came in. I didn't know Carmilla as well as Rose's mother, Edna. We were ordinary acquaintances. She smiled as she entered the room. "Rose," she said in a warm, friendly tone, "you look so much better today. And Cameron looks so sassy and handsome. You are so kind to care so much about Rose. I know Toby would be so proud of you." She said this while leaning down to kiss Rose. As she did this, I noticed a pair of yellow sandals on her feet. I froze. Rose noticed the blood dripping from my face. "Cam? What's wrong?" Both Rose and her mother-in-law looked where I was, looking at Camilla's feet. "Is there something wrong with my sandals?" Camilla asked with a frown. "I bought them yesterday as a special order." "No, sorry, Camilla," I replied. "Sorry. I had a dream last night and your shoes just reminded me of it, that's all," I said, trying to push the thought away. Rose continued to stare me for a minute while Camilla fussed around. "Oh, before I forget, I bought you both lunch at that amazing Asian sandwich shop in North Harbor. They have the most amazing chicken sandwiches," she said animatedly and excitedly, telling us how for just $6, they made them with everything you can hold in two hands. When Camilla said the words chicken sandwiches, I repeated the words with her as I sat down. "Cam, are you okay?" Rose asked worriedly. I looked at Rose, then at Camilla, at the sandwiches in her hand as she unwrapped them for us, and finally at her yellow sandals. It was a dream, I told myself. Just a stupid dream. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence. I tried to justify myself by telling both ladies that I was just tired. Camilla didn't know me well enough to object, but Rose gave me a look that said we'd talk about this later. So we ate our sandwiches, and Camilla was right, they were amazing. Imagine layer upon layer of chicken, lettuce, tomatoes, cheese, beets, pineapple, salt, pepper, and a fantastic fruit relish, sandwiched between two pieces of very soft yet crispy bread, and you have a lunch that will make your taste buds dance. After lunch, we sat and chatted about nothing, mostly about the weather and how we were going to get Rose home. I was no longer so worried and began to relax, resting in the afternoon lull when Louise entered the room. Louise was wearing jeans and a blouse with her hair tied up in a bun. I had to admit she looked good. Perhaps a little thinner than the last time I saw her, but good nonetheless. She was holding a bouquet of flowers and wrapped gift, walking as if she was supposed to be there. She walked as if the last few months had never happened. "Oh, Rose, I'm so glad to see you. You look good, all things considered," Louise said. She looked around the room, then noticed me, and suddenly her whole demeanor changed dramatically. "Cameron," she growled, "what are you doing here? It's your fault that Rose is here and Toby is dead. You have no right to be here. As soon as I'm done divorcing you, I'll make sure that Rose is taken care of, and that she never has to see your ugly face again." I rose to my feet. Storm clouds were gathering. "Get out," said a quiet voice. Everyone turned to the bed, where Rose was crying, turning away from everyone, towards the window. "Rose, it's okay. I'll kick Cameron out of here," Louise said. "No, he will stay and you go," Rose replied. Tears flowed slowly down her face. I took a step towards Louise. "Louise, you need to go," I said sternly. "Listen to me, this time you need to leave." Louise had a seizure of rage. She threw the gift on the floor, and we heard the characteristic sound of it hitting the ground. The flowers were then thrown at the wall. I took 2 steps, standing between Luis and Rose, who was lying on the bed. Camilla stood stunned in the background. Luis launched into a tirade. "Why, Cameron? What the hell did you tell her? She knows you're to blame for Toby's death, doesn't she? Why the hell does she think I have anything to do with her accident or with you? You are the one who needs to go. I'll look after Rose. I'll stay with her to make sure she's okay, now that she's lost her husband." She then looked at Rose's stump where her left arm used to be, and "I'll be happy to make sure she's taken care of," I growled. "What the hell makes you think you can come here after over 2 months without ever asking anything about her and think you have any right to talk to Rose? Kim?" I pointed to the bed behind me. "Rose lost her husband. I lost my best friend. The kids and I have been here every day since the accident. Where have you been?" I started to rattle off my grievances. "Cameron," the voice said again. I continued to advance. "I know why you are here. You lost your job. Your parents are tired of your trash kill in their spare bedroom. Your daughters don't want to talk to you, so you thought you'd manipulate Rose, trying to live off her until she got tired of your crap?" Cameron Rose's voice sounded more insistent. The third time I turned to Rose, angry at being interrupted, and saw the adoring look on my best friend's face. My anger instantly melted. "Sorry," I muttered. "It's all right," Rose answered. She turned her head to look directly at Luis. "Luis, you need to leave. Considering the way you treated Cameron, not to mention the little tantrum you just threw, this shows that you are not my friend. Don't you dare use Toby's death as a reason to blame Cameron. You have become a vile, disgusting creature. I'm ashamed to call you my friend, let alone trust you." Luis began to protest, but Rose raised her stump. "Leave it, Luis. You can't stay here. I'm no longer your friend, and you're not welcome here." "Do I need to call security to escort you out?" Rose asked. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Luis, pleaded. "This is unfair. Nobody is." "No, Luis," Rose interrupted, anger rising in her voice. "What's not fair is that my husband is dead, and I'm crippled for life, because you decided to cheat on your husband, who is one of my closest friends." The room fell silent, the only sounds coming from the corridor. No one said anything. Then a frown appeared on Luis, his face which I had come to associate with her denial of everyone around her and life in general. She looked from Rose to me, back to Rose, and finally back to Rose one last time. Every time she looked, a whole range of emotions was reflected on her face, but the frown remained. When she looked at Rose one last time, the venom erupted. "Well, screw you then, Rose. I see how this happens. Your husband's body has not even cooled down in the grave, and you are already sleeping with my husband, you hypocrite." She seethed but didn't finish, as I grabbed Louise's arm and led her out of the room. I knew that security would be nearby. I turned to my wayward wife, Louise. "I don't know what the hell is wrong with you. I don't know what caused you to go from being a loving wife and caring friend to being healthy, but it will stop right now," I told her decisively. "Louise. Thank God. Shut up and pull back." "Cameron," she said. "Now, Louise, I've had enough. You have severed every relationship around you, from your daughters, to your friends, to me. Nobody, and I really mean nobody, wants you within 100 meters of us. You've turned into a narcissistic expletive who doesn't seem to care about those around you." The doors opened and 2 burly guards came out. They noticed Louise and me. "Are you okay, Mr. Last Name One?" asked Peter. The larger of the 2 guards added. I let her go, with a wave of my hand. "It's okay, Peter. Louise just got a little emotional and upset when she saw Rose in the hospital bed. However, she was just about to leave, wasn't she?" Louise looked at me, then at the guards, resigned. "Sure, see you later, Cameron," she said. I shook my head. We watched as Louise left, and the guards escorted me back to Rose's room, where Camilla and Rose were whispering. After making sure Rose was okay, the security left. The cleaners came in to tidy up the mess with the gift. 20 minutes later, Camilla came out to giving me a big hug. "Thanks, Cameron. You're looking after her now. She needs you," Camilla whispered to me, hugging me, before calling herself an elevator. "Are you okay?" I asked Rose, sitting down on her bed. Now it was just the two of us. I grabbed her right hand, holding it. "Isn't that what I should be asking you?" she snorted. I shrugged. It was a strange day. But it wasn't until the run-in with Louise that I felt, I don't know, calm down. But now I think it all started with a dream last night. Rose's head jerked to look at me. "A dream?" I nodded. "Yes. I couldn't sleep last night when I got home." I blushed. I think she realized that our kiss was partly to blame. Anyway, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, but when I finally fell asleep, I had a dream about Toby and the pop. Rose nodded, almost understanding. It was strange. It's like I knew it was a dream. It was a big pop. There were other people there, but it was like they were out of focus. Rose finished for me, researching mine. I think my surprise was noticeable. Yes, they were out of focus. Well, with the exception of Toby and some other guy, I can't remember. Toby was very clear. We talked. He told me what would happen today, so I knew it was more than a dream. Camille issues the sandwiches. Louise's appearance. Toby said it would all happen. I looked back at Rose. Her eyes told me that she believed me. There was one more thing, wasn't there? She asked timidly. I nodded. How did she know? I looked at her. A tear rolled down her cheek and she squeezed my hand. I didn't want to ask the question, both fearing and hoping for the answer. What did it mean? I whisper, quietly. Love, Cameron, until the end of your days, Rose said quietly but persistently, looking into my eyes. I took a deep breath. Rose? I asked. She nodded, another tear joining the first, slowly rolling down her cheek. Those were the last words Toby said to me before we both passed out in the car accident. They were the last words he spoke to me in this life. My tears joined hers. How did you know? I watched quietly, almost in a whisper. When you told me about Toby in the pub, he also met me there, telling me how brave I was, but that I would need to let him go and love you the way I always have. He told me that you wouldn't be able to ask this question when the time came, but then I must tell you our last words. With that, we fell into each other's arms. I hugged Rose in the fading light and we cried as we cried. We spoke quietly about the man we knew, a friend, a lover, a husband, and a father. We mourn our shared loss together, growing even closer in our grief. As evening fell, the hospital noises continued around us. Rose made room for me on the small hospital bed, and we continued to hug each other as best we could, both of us suddenly tired. Finally, when we fell asleep, I kissed the top of her head, whispering, I love you. In response, Rose snorted slightly as she replied, I love you too, Kim. After that day, we gradually felt better. The children Sarah, Carrie, and Robbie found us the next day, huddled together on the bed under the hospital blanket that the nurse must have thrown over us during the night. Sarah clapped her hands. When we woke up, they all stood and watched us sleep. We spent the morning talking about what happened yesterday, including Louise, but omitting the dream with Toby. Later that week, everyone agreed that when Rose was discharged, she would not go home but would move in with Sarah and me. Our new location was closer to the hospital, and we agreed that Carrie and Robbie would stay with Rose. They would rent out the other 2 rooms to university students with Rose's in my approval, of course. By the time Rose was discharged, her casts had been removed, and she was now using a series of rigid cloth dressings that could be removed as needed to allow the wounds to continue to heal. Bringing her home was one of the happiest days we'd all had in years. To be honest, I was also a little excited when my new girlfriend moved in with me. The kids had already moved a lot of Rose's clothes and personal belongings into the new house. They even showed some independence by placing them in the master bedroom with my things rather than in the guest room, as we had discussed. But to be honest, I didn't mind the audacity of this move. When we got home, we spent a few hours talking with the kids. After dinner, Carrie and Robbie headed back to Rose's old house. Sarah, under a plausible pretext, went to visit a friend for a few hours, leaving Rose and me alone for the first time all day. For the first time since we turned 18, Rose appeared before me in the morning. We were awakened by the smell of breakfast coming from behind the door. A few moments later, Carrie waltzed into the room, holding her hand in front of her face. "Cover yourselves, you two. I'm coming in," she said, smiling and lowering her hand. When she saw that we were both covered with a sheet, "Sleep well?" she asked. "Amazing, honey," Rose replied, sleepily. "It's so nice to sleep in a normal bed again." She looked at me and added, "Sleep next to the one you love. Breakfast is ready." Sarah and Robbie are currently setting the table, so I was tasked with coming to see if you needed any help getting ready since we were expecting you both to be undressed. She chuckled. "No, it's okay, honey. Rose and I will get dressed in a couple of minutes. I'll help her down. Be a good girl and close the door when you leave," I said. "Yes, Dad." She gave a playful salute as she walked out, closing the door and laughing. They were all laughing when we came down. About 10 minutes later, the rest of the morning went smoothly. Our new family felt good. It seemed like it always had, and I suppose in some ways it did. We were always in each other's lives. There was a relaxed family atmosphere where we were just being ourselves. A few weeks later, the divorce between Louise and me became final, and our assets were officially divided. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, Louise received very little. She didn't touch my business, which was worth quite a lot. I kept the money from the sale of our original house, and although I shouldn't have done it, I gave her a check for $40,000, which was just under half of our total savings. Why did I do this? If, according to the marriage contract, I would have to give her only half of this amount, you ask? Well, it was for two reasons. Firstly, Louise's actions destroyed any relationship we had. I wanted to give her enough money so she could move out of her parents' house and start a life somewhere else. I heard she was offered a job in London, which would mean we wouldn't have to see her anymore. I hope that giving her this money would encourage her to take this step. Besides, my agreement with her firm to keep the affair between her and Roger secret gave me an order of magnitude more than I gave her, so I wasn't suffering financially. Speaking of Roger, it looks like he was in a little trouble. He couldn't get a job and somehow ended up in jail. In my opinion, this could not have happened to a nicer guy. 6 months passed, and Rose and I were married. She looked beautiful in her wedding dress, with a bouquet on her stomach. She was self-conscious about the way she looked, going through several bouts of depression, but since the kids and I were always there, it never lasted long. Rose also changed jobs after finishing her psychology degree. She got busy counseling those who, like her, have lost limbs. 2 years after we got married, the government awarded her the Australia Day Award for her contribution to helping disabled people in need. In her speech, she thanked her family and friends, and then called me on stage, citing me as the main reason for her success because I was there for her as she recovered from her accident. It was a tense time. Both Rose and I gave several media interviews. We even appeared on morning shows to talk about the physical and mental challenges of people with disabilities. My wife was a beauty, and despite her handicap, she never allowed anyone to see her worry or cry. During the times when she was down, she knew I was there for her to help her get back up. The love that Rose and I had for each other grew every day. Even though we had our differences, we always forgave each other and never went to bed angry. We didn't see Louise for about 3 years after the awards. It was Carrie and Robbie's wedding. They graduated with honors from university in their chosen fields, had good jobs, but wanted to start a family while they were young. Carrie didn't want to invite her mother in 3 years. They spoke twice. Both times they were laconic and unfriendly. But the only reason I persuaded her to invite Louise was that she had given birth to Carrie and should be able to celebrate the occasion. In the end, Carrie relented, but asked that Louise be seated at one of the tables with the regular guests rather than the family. I shrugged. I didn't care where my ex-wife sat as long as it was next to Rose and me. I just wanted to make sure that Carrie didn't look back in the years to come, wishing her mother had at least attended her wedding. In the end, a compromise was found. Louise ended up sitting with her elderly parents, who were happy to sit in a couple of tables in the back to keep the peace with their granddaughter and her new husband. As is always the case with ex-wives at weddings, I was at the bar and got myself a crack-in and a Coca-Cola. It wasn't included in the bill, but since I was paying for everything, I could get what I wanted. Louise came up to me and leaned her elbows on the counter next to me. She ordered a glass of white wine, then turned and looked at me. I never said I was sorry, did I? She asked directly, but it was more of a statement than a question. No, I said, turning around and looking at the crowd. Rose, Sarah and Carrie were on the other side of the room, laughing at something. I smiled, but then added, I never thought you'd do this. Louise sighed. You're right. I was a complete mess back then, a complete and utter mess, completely of my own making, she said. Yes, I replied, pronouncing the last syllable and then taking a sip of my drink. Rose looked at me, smiled, then frowned when she saw Louise next to me. I shook my head slightly and she nodded, realizing there was no problem. I saw you both at the Australia Day Awards and have followed what you've both achieved since then, Louise said sadly. She watched my wife, her ex-girlfriend, laugh with her daughters, knowing that she would never be able to enjoy a relationship like that with either of her daughters. Again, she hates me. They all hate me, don't they? Louise asked, looking at them, then at me, then down into her glass of wine. Hate is too strong a word, Louise, I said. After a moment of reflection, I chuckled. No, actually, that's the right word for what they think about you. But time passes and the fire subsides. Who knows? Maybe in 10 years the girls will answer your phone call. I felt rather than saw Louise's shoulder slump. Then she turned to me. What about you, Cameron? Do you hate me? Asked my ex-wife. I shrugged. I hate it. I despise it. I abhor it. Choose for yourself. I heard the band begin to tune their instruments in the background. I smiled to myself, knowing that soon I would be dancing with my daughter. But you convinced Carrie to invite me tonight, so if you hate me so much, why? She moaned. I turned to look at Louise. For the first time that evening, she was an empty woman compared to the person I knew before. Her cheeks were sunken, as if she hadn't eaten well, and her bottom was swollen. There was a haunted look in her eyes, and it looked like her hair had not only turned gray or had bad dye, but her hairline had receded a little. Overall, I knew that this woman I once loved was broken. I studied her for a moment longer before answering. Louise, no mother should miss her daughter's wedding, but I didn't invite you here to make you feel better. I invited you to make sure our daughter has a clear conscience when she gets married. I paused, then raised my glass to the passing couple. That's all. And if I never have to see you again, I'll consider myself lucky. With that, I left, joining my family for the wedding dance. I actually heard a sob in someone saying, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately for her, the way she behaved did not inspire any sympathy. We danced, ate, joked, and laughed for the rest of the night, and I never saw Louise again. We heard from her parents that Louise died a few years later. This was right after Sarah had just gotten engaged to the doctor. Yes, surprise, I didn't expect this. But at Sarah's engagement party, we learned that Louise had an ovarian cyst that became inflamed, and she died in her hospital bed, with only her parents by her side. She didn't want anyone to tell us anything. She was very sad. As for Rose and me, we were honest with each other. When our grandchildren were born, we doted on them together. We traveled the world, seeing the sights and wonders. We made love in different countries, spoiled our grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. They knew that Rose and I were in love with each other, and that love had not faded at all. Over the years, some older people were up to some risky fun, have just proven it. When I looked at my rose petal, I saw the girl I loved at 18, the woman I married in my 40s, and the mischievous smile of my grandmother approaching 82. And I knew that today I was lucky. I knew in my soul that I would be loved until death. What do you think of this story? I found it a bit long, but overall interesting in nature. I like the main character, Cameron. Write your stories in the comments under this video. Put a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.